All right. So our next presentation today will consist of a panel of extremely talented scientists from here at Rice. The first of which will be Dr. Neil Lane. Dr. Lane is the Professor of Physics and Astronomy Emeritus here at Rice University, as well as the Senior Fellow in Science and Technology Policy at the Baker Institute for Public Policy. Dr. Lane has a long career in science policy, which includes stints as director of the National Science Foundation and as member of the National Science Board from 1993 to 1998, and also as director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy from 1998 to 2001. As recognition for his service, Dr. Lane has received the National Academy of Sciences Public Welfare Medal, the American Institute of Physics K.T. Compton Medal, and the Vannevar Bush Award, which recognizes exceptional lifelong leaders who have made substantial contributions to the nation through public service activities in science, technology, and policy. Our next speaker will be Dr. Rachel Meadow. Dr. Rachel Meadow is the Fellow in Energy and Environment at Rice University's Baker Institute, where she studies sustainability, the circular economy, domestic and international policy related to life cycle management and hazardous wastes, plastic recycling technologies, and the resiliency of the energy industry. She has previously served as the Director of Regulatory and Technical Affairs at the American Chemistry Council and as Deputy Associate Administrator for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration within the U.S. Department of Transportation. Altogether, Dr. Meadow has more than 20 years of experience in industry, academia, government, politics, and international relations, all in managing the entire life cycle of hazardous waste operations and emergency response to chemical, explosive, radioactive, and biohazardous materials. And finally, Dr. Scott Solomon is an associate teaching professor in the Department of Biosciences here at Rice, where he teaches ecology, evolutionary biology, and scientific communication. He is also a research associate at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History, and Dr. Solomon's research examines the ecology and evolution of insects, microbes, and humans. In addition to teaching and research, Dr. Solomon has done a tremendous amount of scientific outreach, speaking and writing about science at schools, museums, churches, science cafes, TEDx events, you name it. He has appeared on numerous television and streaming series, as well as radio broadcasts on NPR and the BBC, and his writing and photography have appeared in publications such as National Geographic, NBC News, Slate, Eon, Nautilus, and Wired. And his first book, Future Humans: Inside the Science of Our Continuing Evolution, was included on the 2017 Best Book list by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We will begin our Q&A with the panel immediately, so please feel free to begin submitting your questions and help me welcome up our speakers. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I guess I'd like to get started just by asking if each of you could briefly sort of walk us through your career, there it is, and how you got involved in public policy and engagement, and sort of what the focus of your work is as well. So I guess Dr. Meadow, we can start with you and we can go down the line.
All right, well, how much time do we have? Well, my start in policy, I mean, it really was a circuitous path. I didn't intend, my desired end state was not working in the policy field. I have a lot of interest in a lot of different things, and I always have. And in fact, I thought I was going to be an entomologist of all things. Like early, I wanted to go into medical entomology and be a pathologist and understand, when bodies died, or if they when somebody had died, and if they've got moved from one place to another. I don't know. And so that was like an early interest, and so but I was interested. I've always been interested in ecosystems. I've really been wanting to understand from an early age things at the molecular level, the cellular level, the species level, and how all of those things interact in our global society and environment. And so that took me down many different pathways, which explains my varied undergraduate degrees, in zoology and animal physiology, and minored in entomology, never made it to the end, and biological sciences and chemistry and physics. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do with that. After I had graduated, and my first job was working as a hazardous materials chemist for an environmental services company. And so, during that point in time, the policy really was on the last thing on my mind. But I was working for the government, working for military, and I managed the hazardous waste and the environmental programs for, all of the different government operations, not just in the United States, but around the world. So it took me to a lot of different places to really help me understand, how things are generated, who generates them, using what processes and where they go at the end of the life. And so I did that for a whole number of years and had a number of jobs in between that. After I had done that for a number of years and worked in as a bomb technician and worked with the Drug Enforcement Agency as a chemist, a reactive materials chemist, and doing the drug busts and all of that, I decided that, and that's all like 24/7 work because you're on call all the time. But I always had a desire to go back to school and get higher education. And so I took a job with the University of California school system, UCSD in San Diego. And it really was the kind of the catalyst for me I was prior to that steeped in regulations and international policies and stuff, but it really was managing a waste facility and really understanding that my work within that system could have a lot of influence at the local level or the state level, or influence federal policies. And I was doing some work in green chemistry and waste minimization. So that's what really clicked for me. What got me into my whole role in shaping policy. And from there, I continued on my education. Still in a variety of different realms, because I thought that, maybe I want to teach too. And so I ended up getting my master's in education and certified to teach chemistry and physics. But then, my interest with policy just really didn't wane. And that's when I pursued a master's degree in environmental policy and management, and then later my PhD in public policy and law. But all that took. So I'll try to be concise with this. But so all of that kind of took me to DC eventually. And I was working as a policy director, essentially, kind of heading up the advocacy for the petrochemical industry, specialty chemical industries. And so I was kind of overseeing and helping to kind of bring consensus to a lot of different issues that hundreds of different chemical and petrochemical companies have, and so that really immersed me into the whole policy making sphere at the federal level. Prior to that, it was either kind of international avenues or in the state of California, and there kind of opportunities just presented themselves to me. And I ended up, as a senior executive at the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, and had some other opportunities. And that was an awesome experience, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more. But I really always had this like crazy noetic stimulation for so many different things, and I had such a strong pursuit of different intellectual areas. And so when this opportunity at the Baker Institute came about, I really saw it as another way that I could help shape and influence policy. And that's kind of, what landed me here. And then, then other avenues opened up as well. I mean, I'm also a corporate advisor for Morgan Stanley Capital International. And so it's another way you can help sort of shape policy through the financial market and so forth. But that really is kind of a high-level overview of how I got into policy and what stimulated my interest in it.
Great. Dr. Lane, you go.
Well, I don't have anything like the fascinating story that Rachel just described. I'm a science kid from Oklahoma. Yes, I grew up in the oil fields, and I guess my interest in science had something to do with stars and storms and sparks. I really liked electricity, and I did some unkind things to small animals. Nobody was harmed. I mean, everybody was okay, but that was my early life. So I decided at the age of about 12 I'd be a physicist. Didn't exactly know what that was or what it meant, but it got set in my mind for some reason or other. And so I went to the University of Oklahoma, where I stayed for all my degrees. Turns out my high school sweetheart, who became my wife, had a job, and so she helped put me through grad school. And we've been married 61 years now, so it's worked out pretty well. Best thing that happened to me, probably. But second best was science. So I did the usual things in postdoc experience and got a job at Rice. Why did I come to Rice? Because they offered me a job, so I came. And that was a great decision. And so I wrote some grants and taught courses as best I could, kind of trial and error. Some of you as students have seen that probably in real time. And then, as often happens through the promotion cycle, and you go to conferences, you review proposals, you start to meet other scientists. You start to build a network, not in any kind of structured way, I think, but it just happens. One thing happens after another. And then if you behave yourself, sometimes people recommend you to be on a committee, advisory committee, or one kind or another. And so I was elected chair of my division of the American Physical Society. And suddenly I discovered that I needed to worry a little bit about policy. Now, policy to me at that point meant more money for physics research. It was pretty straightforward what I was going to think about and what I was going to work on. So that took me to Washington to meet with members of Congress and agency officials, Department of Energy, in those days the Atomic Energy Commission, and then ERDA. Start to learn a little bit about government, but strictly through this advocacy role. I'm here on behalf of my science community. And then because I complained enough, they put me on the advisory committee for the physics division of the National Science Foundation. And so then I complained officially with my colleagues in other fields. So now the network expands. Now your colleagues are high energy physics, condensed matter physics, biophysics. So it's the same thing that happens, I think, to a lot of us who start out in science and end up in policy. Then a funny thing happened. The division director, civil servant, wanted to take leave of absence, and so I was invited to fill in for him for a year and run the physics division. I think what he said was, if you're so smart about what I'm doing wrong, why don't you come and sit in this chair for a year and see what you want to do, and you can do anything you like. So I thought, why not? I had students on my campus here at that point, graduate students, postdocs, who were very good mentors, and so I thought a year I could do that. So I went to Washington, and as Rachel can tell you, and Adriana, a year in Washington you can really learn a lot. I mean, so much happens that brings you into all different aspects of science policy. So I learned a lot in a year. They wanted me to stay longer. I said no. My career is academics. I teach, I do research. So, but then some years later, I got into administration and then had an opportunity to go to the National Science Foundation as director during the Clinton administration, and there was an agency I knew a lot about. I loved the agency, so I thought I'd been, at that point, a provost here at Rice for 7 years, and I thought that's enough time to be a provost, and the university needs fresh blood in that job, and it's not a bad time to move. So I went to the NSF and served there at 5 years as director. It was a wonderful job. And then the President Clinton asked me to come to the White House as science advisor. And then most wonderful thing happened. After the end of the Clinton administration, Malcolm Gillis, who was president of Rice at this point, said, Rice would like you to come back to the campus and do whatever you want to, but we'd like you to work with the Baker Institute. We'll make you a university professor, and you can have an office and teach when you want to, whatever you want to, and so forth. So I told the wife, I went home and told the wife I'd gotten that call, and she said, that all sounds very great, but will there actually be a salary connected with the position? I said, well, I didn't ask. So she said, would you mind going back and just checking it out? So sure enough, there was a salary. So that was in 2001, and since then I've been happy to be at Rice, interacting with colleagues I've known forever and meeting new ones, working with the Baker Institute, with Kirsten, who you saw, Kenny Evans, on various aspects of science policy that were of mutual interest to all of us, and especially the chance to interact with students, undergraduates, graduate students, try to answer impossible questions like how to communicate with the public, how to get into science policy, what it's all about, many of the things that have already been discussed at this incredible symposium. So I very much appreciate being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be a part of this very distinguished panel. And my work deals a lot less with policy per se compared to Rachel and Neil, but science communication and outreach are very important to me and have become a really big part of my career, as you heard from my introduction. So how I got there is, I guess if we're going to go back to the early days, you got to hear a little bit about Neil and Rachel when they were young. So for me, I was that kid that grew up outdoors, kind of looking for bugs in the yard and digging for dinosaur bones. And I never found any dinosaur bones, but that didn't stop me from looking. And was just curious about the natural world. And when it came time to sort of figure out what kind of career I was going to have, at the time, I didn't know about that many types of careers. I really liked biology, and so I thought, well, I guess I'll be a doctor, because that was sort of the career that I was aware of. So I started off college pre-med, but I also got involved in research in a molecular cell biology research lab. And that started to lead me down a path where I realized, oh, there are other types of career paths that people take if they really are excited about biology. And a couple of things happened to me. I spent a semester overseas, living in Ecuador, and got to go on field trips to the Amazon and up into the Andes and to the Galapagos Islands. And also switched to another research lab that was doing more ecology and evolutionary biology. And at some point, for me, it just clicked, oh my God, how do I get to do more of this amazing field work and asking questions about, how nature works and how organisms interact with one another, or how they've evolved over time. I was really fascinated. So I ended up going to a PhD program for ecology and evolutionary biology. And while I was there, I had another sort of epiphany, I guess, and it was that, I had always enjoyed reading not just academic research, but reading work by science journalists, science writers, those who were communicating not for other scientists, but for the public. And at some point I thought, it'd be really fun to try to do some of that writing, but I had no idea how. And so I was at UT Austin. I thought, let me just go over to the student newspaper and see if there's somebody there that can guide me in the right direction. So I walked into the office one day and said, who do you guys have that's writing about science? And they said, no one. Why don't you do it? which was not what I had expected. But the great thing was that they paired me up with an editor, a student who was a journalism major, who basically sort of taught me how to write about science in a news format, the complete opposite of scholarly writing. And I loved it. I absolutely fell in love. I got to write all these different articles, not just about my own research, but about research that other people were doing. And I thought, my gosh, how do I get to do more of this? There wasn't at the time a lot of opportunity for training in that kind of science communication. Thankfully, there is more now, and I would love to see even more of that. But there's more opportunities to get that training today than there was when I was a grad student. So I tried to figure out, well, what's next? I really wanted to kind of get my work published in a higher profile places, national publications. But I ran into the kind of chicken and the egg issue, which is that if you want to get published in the national media, you often have to have already been published. They want to see your published clips. You write to National Geographic or Discover or one of these publications. They're like, hey, great story idea. What have you done? But luckily, this is where having written for the student newspaper actually ended up being enough. So I haven't written in these high-profile places, but look what I did for the Daily Texan. And an editor took a chance on me and took an article in Slate was the first place that I got that published. And I was hooked at that point. It was like, all right, how do I get to do more of this? I went to a workshop in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that's run by a couple of New York Times science journalists who kind of bring together a group of national writers, editors, and others in science writing, science communication. And I came away from that workshop convinced I want this to be a big part of my career, not just a small part, but I actually thought about dropping out of the PhD program at that time and just becoming a science writer. And thankfully decided, I only had like a year left in my PhD. I was like, maybe having a PhD wouldn't be a bad thing to have if I'm gonna, be a science writer. So I finished the PhD. Was lucky to get a postdoctoral fellowship at the Smithsonian. And while I was there, I found I really missed teaching, much to my surprise. I didn't expect to have missed teaching students as much as I found myself missing it when I was focusing on research. And so because of that, and because I wanted to be able to have the flexibility to really pursue science writing and science communication in a big way, I made a choice to follow an academic career, but to pivot a bit from the sort of the traditional pathway and not pursue a tenure track position. So what brought me to Rice was the opportunity to come here into a non-tenure track faculty position. So I have a teaching-focused position. And for me, this has been the greatest thing because it allows me to focus the majority of my time on teaching undergraduate students. But it gives me flexibility because I'm not running a big research lab to spend a lot of time still doing science writing, and that has expanded to other forms of science communication as well. And now I really see teaching and science communication as sort of two sides of the same coin. I think the skill set has a lot of overlap. We're sharing our knowledge and our passion for science with people, whether it's students in the classroom or readers of a book or an article, or if I'm giving a public talk or making a documentary. Obviously you pivot a bit depending on your audience and the format, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of the skill set does overlap. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now.
Awesome, thank you. I think probably a first question to start with today, I'd like to ask something that sort of relates to all three of you, which is, all of you work in a field or on policies that are very future-looking, like many scientists. So, whether it's plastic waste buildup or pollution, or basic research funding, or even the evolution of humankind, these are things that are going to be very important, perhaps 20, 50 years from now, but often face costs in the immediate future in order to achieve any sort of long-term goals. So how do we build up support for either policies or ideas for these sort of immediate short-term deficits for long-term gains?
Well, I guess I could start here just with my 2 cents in this is, I think it helps to take, and yes, we're all future forward and really progressive in what we're doing. But on the path to that, you can't lose sight of the present, you can't lose sight of the past, and you don't want to create unintended consequences, which is why it's really important to understand, the big picture and to capture the data. And that's why like scientists and researchers are so important, because they can help unpack systemic biases and bring some truth and data to the actual discussion. And so what I typically do is I take a life cycle approach to everything. I've always looked at things really holistically, and because of my multidisciplinary background, it's really helped me understand all of the nuances within an environment and within a system. And so when I have students or people in their early careers ask me, how can we, we've got all these great ideas and, like energy transitions and all of these cool things that can change the world. What I always kind of advise them is to, if you're interested in other things, look to other disciplines or collaborate with other people, other entities, other organizations to get the bigger picture, so that we're moving in a certain direction towards the future, but you also don't want to compromise the present. And there's also a lot of legacy issues that always populate and present themselves again, either in the present or sometime down in the future. So it's really helpful to have a comprehensive understanding of not only just different disciplines, but like risk shifting and all of this. And data and science is behind a lot of these things. And so, scientists and researchers have such an important role to play when it comes to making sound advancements to the future.
Do you want to go ahead? Let me use a example that may be a little bit off point, but it came to mind, something that happened when I was director of the National Science Foundation. There was a project that had already been started to observe gravitational waves. It was a partnership between Caltech and MIT, outstanding scientists. Kip Thorne is a name many of you may know, a cosmologist who really was the theorist that was behind this particular initiative. And I'd known about this work a little bit from my earlier time at NSF, so I sort of knew something about science. But by the time I got to the NSF, the project was in trouble. They had started to fund construction of these big laser detectors, that two of them, one in Louisiana, one in Washington, that would be used to observe gravitational waves coming from all around the universe. But the project was underfunded for the schedule. It was behind schedule. It was running into trouble. NSF had stopped the project. So the question was, where do we go from here? So I was very enthusiastic about this work, primarily because, A, it seemed technically impossible. The more I learned from the scientists about what was going to be required, the technology of these laser measurement systems just struck me as absurd. However, I was being told that by scientists who were not in any way absurd. They were among the best in the world. And my confidence was in them. So I wanted the project to go forward. And so I had my conversations with the administrations of the universities and said, look, fix the management, and then I'll do everything I can with my colleagues to get this project back on track. And they did. In fact, President of Caltech, very gutsy decision, made changes in the management, brought on board a former high energy physicist and experimentalist that said, I'll do the job half-time. And he did an outstanding job. Once that looked like that was in shape, then I took it back to the National Science Board and then the White House Office of Management and Budget, because this was the largest construction project the National Science Foundation would ever have done. And yet the argument for it you couldn't find something more esoteric than to spend all of this money, which ultimately ended up being over $1 billion, to observe gravitational waves, especially when an outstanding scientist like Kip Thorne said, this is real, we are going to be able to do this, but probably not with this particular instrument that we're building right now. It's going to take time, and unless we're really lucky and there's an event somewhere in the universe that's big enough to send us a signal we can measure, I can't myself say this is going to happen soon. So those were the circumstances. So now you go to the Congress, and two things I would say about it. It's not a threatening kind of thing to any members of Congress, Republican or Democrat. There's nothing partisan about gravitational waves. So it contrasts with some very other important scientific issues that have developed political views on both sides of a different kind on different sides of the aisle. So you started out with the advantage of not having that political polarization around the science you're talking about. The second thing was that members of Congress had no idea what I was talking about. It's rather like selling a math project to them. I mean, and that's not a criticism of our members of Congress. It's pretty complicated. The theory behind it is pretty complicated. So that's where trust comes in. Key members of Congress have to, based on previous experience, trust you that what you're telling them is not selling you a lemon, that there's really something behind. When you say there's a scientific consensus here, there really is a scientific consensus, and so forth. You understand what I mean? But finally, it's a lot of money. And there I was just, I think the researchers, not me, I had nothing to do with this. I just happened to be in the job at the time. A little bit lucky because Gingrich had just come to town. The Congress had just turned over after the election, 1994. So the Republicans were going to cut government. That was part of the platform. And they were going to end up cutting science. But Gingrich himself wasn't anti-science. What he really would like to do is get the money away from Democrats, get it away from social programs, give it to science. And there was some of that feeling in Washington at the time. Of course, I wasn't against social programs, but my job was to get this project back in place. So in the end, President Clinton said, let's go with it. OMB wrote it into the budget. The appropriation committees liked the idea, and it got funded. But in a way, it was a set of circumstances. So very much a long-range issue where you really can't promise much. When I got specific questions about what good is this for the folks back in Kansas City or Oklahoma City, I was really able to, of course, talk about knowledge and culture, but I also was able to point to technological breakthroughs, new stabilization techniques and lasers that didn't exist before that, small companies that got started up to support this project, and a little bit anecdotal, but it was the best I could do to address the short-term questions. So you can often have it both ways a little bit. You can have an immediate impact, the university's immediate impact to students, graduates who go out and make the world a better place, even if the research that a student is doing perhaps promises certain outcomes over a decade or 2 decades. So it's an example. It's not probably something in everybody's minds right now, but of course, with the upgrades of the facility long after I left NSF, these laser systems observed gravitational waves, and now many of them have been observed due to colossal, catastrophic events involving black holes and neutron stars in various parts of the universe. So Kip Thorne was right. We're going to be able to do it, but it was just going to take time.
So for me, one of the projects that I've been involved in recently that relates to the future and thinking about the future is has to do with insects. I'm a bug guy, right? So one of the The issues that we're facing now is a biodiversity crisis, right? We can see around the world that, that species are disappearing, becoming endangered, et cetera. Now, insects don't enjoy the same kind of media attention as, you know, polar bears and other sort of cute, cuddly, charismatic organisms. So, you know, it's a little bit of a challenge to make people aware of what's happening to insects. But all the data suggests that the same kinds of trends are happening to insects that are happening to other species. And you might have experienced this yourself if you've been on a road trip recently, right? It used to be the case you had to stop every so often and squeegee off your windshield, like when you got gas, because of all the bugs, right? It's not so much the case most places anymore. That's alarming, because we know that insects are an essential part of, you know, natural ecosystems, and but the mosquitoes are exactly the problem, because you can't convince people that fewer bugs is bad. Most people are like, oh, fewer mosquitoes and cockroaches, awesome. But of course, you know, many of those insects are food for other organisms. They perform important ecosystem services like pollinating our food, breaking down animal waste and dead things and other things that you don't really want to have to think about. They're doing it for us, right? So the question is, how do you convince people that this is something worthy of our concern, and more to the point, worthy of action? So I don't know that I know the answer to that, but the things that I've been trying to do are sort of a multi-pronged approach. So on the one hand, you know, through my job here as a professor teaching college students, as Neil said, we produce students, we produce graduates. You know, I try to include as many examples of the important roles of insects in my teaching, and try to bring students out into nature as much as we can, so that they can personally experience and come to appreciate what insects are doing. But I've also tried to figure out other ways to include, you know, outreach related to insects. So my big pandemic project was a 24-part series called Why Insects Matter, that just came out recently through the Great Courses. So it's you know, more than you ever wanted to know about bugs, but it's really focused not so much on, like, you know, people who are maybe already interested in insects. It's like, why should we all care about insects? What are the things that insects are doing that are valuable to nature and for people? And try to do that in an accessible way. And then trying to reach kids. So, you know, I try to give outreach talks in various places. I'm giving a talk at the Children's Museum, Children's Museum of Houston, coming up soon, all about ants. Not quite sure exactly how it's going to go, but I'm going to try to get the kids excited about ants, because that's one of my favorite organisms. So, I mean, I think, you know, it requires all of us to see what we can do to try to share our knowledge and our passion, because it is a crisis, and it is something that's going to affect future generations. You know, if insects were to decline and disappear, you know, it would disrupt life as we know it. And I realize that it's hard with everything going on in the world to have yet another crisis to worry about, and one that maybe seems more distant, but it's real and it's happening. So that's my approach, to try to figure out different ways to try to help.
I have a couple of follow-up comments with that. Well, first, that's a travesty about the insects. You know, I have a collection of cockroaches from all the different places I used to live, and so. But anyway, I have a couple of follow-up things, and it's mainly from like a structural standpoint, I guess, from my time in DC, and it kind of speaks to what you're saying is that it's really, for me and what I saw, it is the, you know, what's on the political agenda that really drives, you know, change in the issue, and not so much science. Science can help inform good policy, but it is not going to, you know, that's not really, you know, that might not be the priority of the day if it's not the priority of the administration. And that's something that I had a hard time with coming in from the outside, and realizing that, because I'm like, wow, like these issues are really critical. I mean, so when I first came into the agency, I was appointed by Obama, and the big issue was crude oil derailments. because there was a massive derailment in Lac Mégantic in Canada that killed hundreds of people, and then we had several other derailments across the country, and so we went through this multi-billion-dollar rulemaking with Federal Rail and other multiple agencies, and we had Canada involved, of course, because of the Crossrail situation, and so we went into this big testing program on looking at the chemical and physical characteristics of crude oil, and coming to find that depending on where the crude oil is taken from, the geography makes a really big difference into its flammability and whether or not it acts like a gas, and so we spent all this money trying to understand what the parameters were, and realize, wow, this multi-billion-dollar rulemaking where we had tank designers have to redesign their tanks, and we had to upgrade tanks with all of these safety fittings, may not actually be the right path, because now we are understanding more about the chemical and physical characteristics of crude oil. And so everybody was in an uproar thinking, gosh, what do we do now? We already have this rulemaking in place. Well, let me fast forward a little bit. When Trump took office, that wasn't his priority. Crude oil and the transportation of crude oil wasn't necessarily the priority, and so that got taken. The rulemaking that we were doing got taken off the table, got taken off the regulatory agenda, and so priorities shifted there. Which of course brings you to the larger issue of the transitions between administrations that can affect future policies, future rulemakings, future direction of things, because when you have the election cycle every 4 years, you have a new president come in, or maybe it's the same one, or if you have a switch of parties, whatever it is, the incoming administration, whether it's the same, the Democrat or Republican, they have their own priorities, and oftentimes what happens is those current priorities kind of get wiped off the table, and maybe taken up later on down the line. But they have their own legacy and their own priorities, and so what may be a priority for the agency or for the country one moment may now just get kind of put to the back burner, which can be troublesome for, I know it was for a lot of my departments, and especially my scientists, my teams of scientists who were working so hard on these different issues, especially this crude oil issue, to come to find out that, well, we're no longer going in that direction. That's not our priority anymore, so let's kind of shift gears to something else. So that really impacts progression. It impacts the development of a certain issue area, and could really stymie policy direction in a number of ways. And the other comment I wanted to make about biodiversity, which is really important in these conversations that we're having today about climate change and sustainability, and everybody's gung-ho about creating their own sustainability agenda and aligning with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's really important for everybody to understand the bigger picture and the systems picture, which I think is what you were saying, because in a lot of our discussions, we bring in our biases, we bring in what we know, and not necessarily we don't understand both sides of the picture, and that's kind of a deficiency that I see across the board, and in a number of different organizations, and with younger students or people in the policy field trying to advocate for a specific issue, is you have to understand not only the bigger picture but the other side of the argument, and with the whole biodiversity and climate change and sustainability being an international priority and now a national priority. That is a part of the sustainability, under the sustainability umbrella, but it gets very little attention. Emissions, and CO2 gets all of the attention and all of the funding, but things like environmental justice and things like biodiversity fly under the radar and don't get the funding and don't get the attention. And that's when you start seeing, down the road a number of years or however long you'll see the precipitation of different rebound effects. So it's always important to understand that from the beginning and understand kind of the larger systemic issues.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like one of the underlying relationships here is just the public's overall relationship with science. And so I was wondering, Dr. Solomon, maybe if you could start us off here, it seems like, especially with the pandemic, there's been a lot of discussion and focus on perhaps a growing rift between members of the general public and scientists. And, there's been talk about doing outreach to try and communicate the benefits of science with these people, but many, people who may feel disenchanted with science aren't necessarily reading popular science magazines or watching YouTube videos made by scientists. They're already not interested. So how do scientists reach out to these people and form some sort of discussion?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's an important question. On the one hand, I think we live in an era where it's easier than ever for people to interact with one another, and at the same time, we see this rift that you just described, where it feels like there's a greater gap than ever before between scientists and the public. I think that there's a lot of ways that we can start to approach this. One is, I think part of the issue is that people often perceive science as happening in sort of this black box. We don't quite know who these people are and where they're doing the science stuff. And so in that context, I think the more that people can have interactions with actual scientists, people doing science, the less mysterious it seems. The more it's like, oh, these are people, and they're, this is what they do. You can have a conversation with them. So I feel like, on the one hand, the traditional model has been for scientists to communicate to the public through the media, through journalists. I think there's a lot of value to that system because journalists are trained to be able to communicate effectively. But I also feel like that can be contributing to this rift, right? This disconnect between scientists and the public. So I think the more that scientists can engage directly with people, whether it's through live events, through webinars, through their work. Maybe not everybody's watching their YouTube channels, but there's so many ways today that people can reach directly out to people. For me, that's been one of the most effective things that I've found to connect with people, is just to interact in one way or another. And I think it's really important that those interactions aren't one way. Right? I think this outreach and science communication needs to be a two-way form of communication. I think as scientists, it's important that we don't just view outreach as informing people about science, but also listening, having actual conversations where it goes both ways, and listening to what people's concerns are, what their questions are, where they're at in terms of what they think about the various, issues of the time. So, I think the last thing I'll say about that is that I think a lot of scientists would like to do this kind of interaction, and many do, but many don't. And as to why they don't, what I hear from my colleagues is often they don't feel that this is what is being sort of prioritized for their careers, right? It's not always what's rewarded in academia. It's not always recognized as being an essential part of the job. Might get a pat on the back or something like that, but it's not something that's being evaluated when it comes to promotion and tenure decisions, for example. So I think there's a role here for academic institutions, scientific institutions, to really say, hey, outreach and communication, this is important stuff. We need to be rewarding people and incentivizing people to do it. I think more scientists would engage in those kinds of outreach and communication if it were seen as a valuable and essential part of their job. I also think we need to have additional training opportunities, right? We talked a little bit about, I was saying that there's more opportunities for students today who are getting degrees in STEM disciplines to learn communication, but I think still not nearly enough. I think we need to try to make science communication training an essential part of getting a STEM degree, so that people not only they might have the desire to interact, but that they are actually trained in how to do it effectively.
I'm still thinking about mosquitoes and roaches. Some talk about, in what Scott just described, as putting a human face on the science. So a lot of people would be surprised with your comment, scientists are people. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement because most people have no idea, never met a scientist, don't know any of them, and it's a really important, the role model situation is particularly important, especially women in science, underrepresented communities. I think one thing I would suggest to our students is that there has been considerable amount of research done on what is effective, what has proved to be effective in changing public opinion. The results are not all that encouraging, I might say, on the whole, but nonetheless, there have been some findings. And for example, the Pew Research efforts, I think you can find online. They do a lot of surveys. Research America does surveys, and many others. And the good news is that, by and large, the public trusts science and scientists more than they do many professions. So our numbers are always up there, not too far away from physicians, for example, but very high above some other professions, like journalists, not a company accepted here, but whatever the public's view is of what journalism is all about. And of course, Congress is always at the bottom of that list. So trust is pretty good. We as a community, we want to be careful not to give that away. So it needs to be kept in our mind all the time. Another finding of a fairly recent survey is that in an issue like climate change, what's proved to be particularly effective in a limited set of thoughtful experiments, let me just say, so it's like one set of experiments, is what's been called consensus messaging. The statement that 94% of climate scientists believe that human-caused climate change is real. Just sort of a simple statement like that. That tends to sway significant numbers of, let's say, the doubters and the resistors, and so those communities, and it cuts along partisan lines. It moves Republicans, at least Republicans with a certain level of education, it moves them much more in the direction of accepting that humans cause climate change, even than it does the average across the whole population. There are some findings like that that are worth looking at, and don't take my word for it. You really need to look at the original sources. So there is some knowledge about what is effective. And then back to Scott's point, I think in communicating with the public about these kinds of issues, first of all, take Scott's course, although you don't have room for everybody, but it's an extraordinary course, and I've had the privilege of visiting with Scott's class on a number of occasions. And when I'm asked about my own approach to communicating, let's say with a public audience in a room, the three things really come to mind. One is to respect the audience. If they get them, people are very, it doesn't matter in their education, they're very attentive to the message that you're sending, how you're treating the public, whether you value the fact that they came to listen to you, whether you think their time is important, whether you think they are important, no matter what their walk in life. So respect for the public. Second is finding a way to connect. That's often a local issue, or it's something that the occasion, like the meeting, is focused on. It might be climate change, might be pandemics, whatever it is. Find something you think is going to connect with the people you believe you've got in the room at the time. So connect is my second one. And the third one is credibility. So a few facts can be very useful, not too many, and it sort of has to be your judgment based on the audience, how you present them, sometimes visually, sometimes words, sometimes percentages like I did a few minutes ago. But they need to be translated in the way that the audience gets them. And for God's sakes, if you're going to use them, make absolutely sure you can answer a question in the Q&A session. How do you know that somebody said that, or where did you get that information? It has to be some level deeper than than I saw it on TV. Or, I mean, you wouldn't say that, but you understand what I mean. So in my experience, that of all of those, I think the respect one is very high, because the audience has got to somehow trust that what you're saying, even if they don't agree with every point you're making, that trust that you're actually trying to connect, you care about them, and you're actually trying to get some information across to them. The last word I would say, again, picking up on Scott's point about the reward system in academia, yeah, it's a little bit old-fashioned. It hasn't really quite caught up, and that's often true with larger cultures and communities, that the promotion tenure system does not respond in real time to societal needs. You might not want it to, given how quickly things can change, but over time it should. Of course, service to the community, which would include what we're talking about, public engagement, should be a more important consideration in most promotion tenure cases and all across the nation, if not the world, than they really have been. Service to the community should be a larger part of federal funding of research. When I was at the NSF, we created something called the broader impact criteria. Every proposal submitted to the National Science Foundation has to answer questions about scientific merit or intellectual merit, whatever it is. Why is this important for science? And what are the possible broader impacts of the work you're doing? Now, those will be weighed differently. I'm not suggesting 50-50, anything like that. I was excited about that idea because I felt that researchers around the country whom I knew, who were outstanding mentors for African Americans, Hispanic, Latinos, women, underrepresented groups, and had shown it over time, got zero credit in the review process, as far as I could tell. And yet their impact could well be enormous. Hard to measure, but could well be enormous. So this was an opportunity for a researcher to say, here are other things that are important to me and that I think my research can accomplish. That was called broader impacts. I think the federal agencies can do more in this direction, but it can't be top down. It's got to be done with the science community. It's got to be a dialogue between the policymakers, if you like, and the agencies and the researchers and the universities out here. It's got to move along together, but I think it does need to move more in the direction that Scott was suggesting.
Yeah, I think community outreach and how to communicate to the public is so important. We had a whole department at PHMSA, at the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, on kind of communicating, what our regulations mean, translating that to the public so they can understand what their obligations are, and it was the most underfunded of all of our groups. We tried increasing that funding, but that it didn't align with the priorities of the agency. And so, but it was very, very integral, and it all goes back to relationships, building relationships with the public, with the stakeholders, with other agencies. Like so much of the work that gets done can't get done without the interaction of other agencies, other governments internationally. And that all plays a part into how things shake out at the end and how they're communicated at the end. But certainly for communicating transparently, as a scientist or whatever your discipline is, communicating transparently about the risks and what the assumptions are a much more effective approach than communicating a lack of risk. Or not really laying out what the unintended consequences could be, what the implications could be, especially in sensitive domains like public health and the economy. So it's really important to provide, not only your recommendations and doing it in a way that is concise and, and succinct. That could be, accessible to a variety of audiences with varying proficiencies, because not everybody is a science out there, especially in the lawmaking world, and also in the general public. But being able to connect in a way where you don't lose the audience, where you don't intimidate them, and that's where finding a way to communicate your research and small tidbits, like what's that 30-second elevator pitch, or oftentimes when companies and industry stakeholders would come see me, they'd have like 15 minutes or 30 minutes, at the most, to lay out their issues or their recommendations, and you have to find a way to be able to consolidate all of your year's worth of research into that 15 minutes, or sometimes you don't even get that long, and so you have to do it in an unarming way, and the best way to do that is focusing on the why. A lot of times, I see people coming in, and the way that we as scientists communicate is we like to tell the whole story, and the how, how we got there, what our research plan was, what our methodologies were, what the statistical significance was, but you can't communicate all of that. How do you do that in small tidbits that the public can understand and that policymakers can understand? And so translating your research into something consumable, and that can be understood, and that can also be translated into policy. Just because we're doing research in a lot of different things doesn't necessarily mean it's going to rise to the occasion. It has to align with the priority, and you have to be able to connect your research to the priority and the policy. It needs a policy vehicle, and how do you get it there? And so I think deficiency oftentimes is that lack of ability to decouple like the passion and motivation behind this complicated research that we're doing into something that can be digestible to regular folks. I know with a lot of my a lot of my friends and family and people I interacted with in my years in DC, I love science and engineering, and I've always been captivated by data, and I love communicating with data and graphs and schematics. I think they're beautiful, but not everybody thinks so. And so how do you how do you take what you've been doing and all of these things into something, how do you visualize the data? Data visualization is totally underutilized, and oftentimes when it is utilized, it is so complicated for the average person to understand. But I think lastly, what I'll say about, back to your question is the, politicizing science undermines scientific integrity, and it detracts from the larger issues at hand. And looking back in history, I think with the onset of the environmental movement, and what was happening with the Vietnam War, and then with a lot of corporations that started scrutinizing federal agencies for over-regulation during the Reagan era. I think a lot of that has corroded the public trust of science. And that wasn't the only thing, but there's trends associated with that. But it's since been met with skepticism, and especially in my area, in the area of the environment. And so it's really important to not bring bias into the discussions and to communicate in a way that's truly objective. And the only way you can get there is to fully understand as much of the picture as you can, as much of the issue, understand the other side of the argument, and that's what that's what made me such a great lobbyist, advocacy specialist, whatever in DC, is because I fully immersed myself, and I would challenge my team to do the same thing, to really understand both sides in and out, and to leave your baggage at the door. Don't bring bias into the discussion, because that's how you lose trust. And that's how you're seen as not being transparent, and those are all policy barriers. They're barriers to truly understanding and connecting and building relationships with the public and policymakers.
Can I add something real quick? Because I really liked Rachel's point about the importance of visualization. I think that is something we really need to make sure goes back to the training piece about training scientists to be better communicators. Visualization, I think, is the future of science communication. I mean, everything's becoming more visual. Video is huge today in a way that wasn't the case even just 10 years ago. But most of our students aren't being trained at all in how to communicate visually. Data visualization being a big part of that. At the same time, one of the things that I learned when I was being trained on sort of how do you tell these stories about science in a way that will connect with the public is, just to learn to tell stories, right? It's like, yes, you have to often convey something about the data. That's an important part of the communication. But people respond to stories and narratives, right? And that, for me, like being trained as a scientific writer, we don't tell stories in our research articles usually. But I find it's one of the most effective ways to do it. So like when I'm talking with people about disappearing insects, I'll try to show some nice visualizations that other people made, not me, because I didn't ever get that training. But I'll also tell them a story about an experience I had when I spent a month on an island in the Pacific because of somebody else's labeling error, but that's a whole other story. So I ended up on this island chasing an ant species that was never on that island. But we did a great study on something else instead. But one of the things that we discovered by spending a month on this uninhabited island is that one of the species that was native to that island, endemic, it occurs nowhere else on Earth, was gone. It was extinct. I mean, nobody's ever found it in the last 100 years. And that was really alarming. And I can sort of, tell people that story of like, I went to this place and had this experience and it's amazing. And there's the species, it was there, it's gone. And in many ways, I find that kind of, even though it's one anecdote, that connects with people in a way that all the graphs and figures and data can't.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to sort of follow up on something you had mentioned, Dr. Meadow, which was sort of bringing the stakeholders and bringing the public into the conversation, and especially when it comes to things like, when it comes to climate policy, the communities that are often most vulnerable to climate change are also dependent on industries that maybe contribute to it. So how do you move forward balancing that sort of sensitive paradigm?
Yeah, it's a highly polarizing and sensitive topic, but not just with climate change, but really any environmental issues today, because we are such a highly interlinked world, and we all want the best for society and communities, yet we don't really fully understand our dependencies on one another and on industry, and so I think for me it goes back to building trust. I've expanded my research portfolio here at the Baker Institute to include something that I used to look at years ago, and that's environmental and social justice. And I think just for for years, I mean, if you look at just the history of environmental racism, I mean, it's these underserved, underprivileged, low-income communities that often got left out of the policy-making process or public discussions, for a variety of reasons. They didn't have the means or access. And so that has created like this, it's just created this air of marginalization. And so, I'm starting to, not just research those things, but really build relationships within the community and bridge these communities, with others in industry, because, it is true, and we are reliant on one another, and there's impacts everywhere. And the problem is we're just not capturing the data. We're not quantifying things in the way that we should be. We're leaving out major sectors and major populations. And so, we're so, everybody is so eager to get to this, desired end state and climate, that we're pushing all these policies that we don't quite understand, what the impacts are going to be. I mean, like, for example, and I'm not like anti-alternative energy. I highly support a diversified energy portfolio, but like, at scale wind projects and solar and the push for electric vehicles that require lithium-ion batteries, and all of the minerals and materials, the demands for that, we don't even understand. But the mineral demand just for the energy systems that are going to be needed for the transition to this climate future is going to increase by 500% by 2050, and that's what we know of. And so in all of these discussions with this data that we're not capturing, or that we think we have, there's all of these communities, and I'll just take Houston, because I'm looking at Houston and the state of Texas. I mean, we are known for, we have the label of being the environmental, racism capital of the world, because of our, proximity to industry, and being one of the largest petrochemical complexes, in the world. And so it's really important to connect the communities with the policymakers, and connect the community with the industries, and have honest discussions about what the true impacts are and what the needs are of the communities. And like I said, they often get left out of these conversations, but they also might not have the public in general might not have access to the latest data, or the data that they receive is from social media or other platforms, which there's a lot of misinformation, as we know, swirling around in the world today. And so it's finding a way to really unpack all that stuff and bringing everybody to the table to have these honest discussions, and making sure that we don't lose sight of what the priorities are in the race and the quest to get to a certain state. What are the other things that we're leaving behind and missing? And for what I see, a lot of it is the social equity and the environmental justice issues, and those are only going to increase in these climate discussions and the pathways that we're currently taking, and it's also going to widen the gap, not just the socioeconomic gap. It's going to widen the gap of trust and the channels of communication between these marginalized communities and industry and policymakers.
May I add a comment? I mean, listening to Rachel talk, I think it's clear to all of us that individuals who are working in the policy arena in non-government organizations like this one, like the Baker Institute, are almost the place of last resort. I mean, a lot of the data is being collected by federal agencies, of course, and as Rachel has said, it's incomplete. We don't have all the data we need, but the trust factor is different for the federal government. It sort of tends to go with administrations. When somebody's in the White House, people have a certain view about what government is saying. In fact, sometimes they're saying different things. They're sending out different messages. It's a very partisan environment that our form of democracy has really given rise to. The NGOs, I mean, organizations like the Baker Institute and other respected centers and institutes for policy studies around the country, in my view, are kind of our only hope here, and they need more support, and I think maybe more networking, more opportunities for several of our organizations to work together to amplify the message, so it doesn't get captured by a particular geography or somehow gets associated in people's minds with being in Texas or being in Michigan or some other part of the country. But I think much more understanding, I think, needs to be given to how important these non-government organizations really are. Some of them are very partisan and known to be, and so it's not, you can't just say that's where you're going to get your information. Many of them have their own websites and their own networking, and you can find all kinds of stuff there. So helping the public understand what is worth their time to connect with is part of the role that Rachel is talking about. But I think what's missing, and Rachel, you may disagree with me, we haven't talked about this, in all of our science organizations, our physicists and chemists and so forth, is, for reasons we do understand, they don't work very well together. They've all got their same boards, they've got their own sources of financial support. Some are competing with each other for the same foundation money or federal money. But we really need to find a way to overcome that, and so that we can amplify some of these critically important messages that tend to get lost, like the ones on environmental justice that Rachel just described. It's an opinion.
No, but it's absolutely true. I mean, the more holistic we can look at things and the more that we can collaborate, the better understanding we're going to have of the larger picture and the impacts. I mean, the government is like, I mean, they're just known for working in silos, and the lack of collaboration is just enormous. I mean, within an agency, even, it's insane. And so that makes it really difficult to kind of socialize different ideas and agendas together. But that is absolutely true about the being able to fuse data and cross collaborate. And I'm not talking about just within a federal government, but like even in this role that we're in now. I mean, that's what we do at the Baker Institute. We bring in different audiences that have very diverging points of view. And it generates, a lot of, great discussion. And we try to foster data sharing where we can, and transparency, and leverage each other's work and interests. And I think it's, and that is a great catalyst for change and collaboration, because now, especially with these larger polarizing issues, you have different facets of society and organizations taking off and running and doing different things, but we should be leveraging each other where we can be, to meet that common goal.
Thank you.
I was wondering as well, Dr. Meadow, when we talk about some of these issues, they're on such a global scale as well. How do we begin to orchestrate that sort of international collaboration?
Well, so I did a lot of work international. I mean, so I got my interest in international work really because I was forced to, in my first job as a hazmat chemist, I was placed in different areas of the world, and so like Antarctica or places in Asia and other parts of the world, and so I recognized the importance of international policy and law and the role it plays in domestic rulemaking, and because a lot of our standards, a lot of our regulations culminate at the international level. They're negotiated there, and if they're agreed upon, then it's up to the member states to implement domestic rulemaking. And so I understood that from that perspective, but I think it's important for the public to also understand that the international piece is really integral because it can drive a lot of issues and act as the important trigger for domestic policies. And so it's really helpful to understand what the agenda and priorities are on the international stage. I did a lot of negotiations at the UN on different policies, for the U.S. And so if you can, track what's happening on that level, you can almost forecast in many ways what's going to be coming down the pipeline years later. Now, that whole process takes years, sometimes decades, when you're working with, all of these 100-some countries trying to negotiate something, but it's important to understand that piece of the picture is really important for the policymaking process here in the United States, and then and even down to the state level as well. And it's something pretty obscure to a lot of folks, what's happening on the international front, but it really does drive, larger issues. And the other thing I'll say to that, from my perspective, working, in those circles and representing the U.S. interests, in particular for hazardous materials, classification, and policy and transportation, is that I forgot my train of thought. What I was going to say to that, but anyway, the global piece is really important. Oh, I know what I was going to say. But the perspective from what I have experienced is a lot of it is driven by OECD perspectives, and what I mean by that is by developed nations, and often what gets left out of the picture, and especially here in the U.S., is developing economies, developing nations. What does this mean to them? And so that's why it's really critical in any type of arena that you're working in, whether it be international or at the federal down to the local level, that you understand what it means to developing economies, underserved communities.
So I guess for our final question today, before we release for lunch, we have a lot of students in the audience today. Could each of you sort of provide, I guess, just a piece of advice on what you think students who may want to be pursuing careers in policy or science communication, what you would say to them? I guess we could start with Dr. Solomon.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess my main piece of advice is that, there's no thing that you can do that is too small. I mean, I think sometimes there's a tendency for students to look out at what other people are doing and see, big projects or, people who have had very successful careers, and it's hard to figure out how you get there. I know that was the case for me. As I said, I had no idea where to get started. But certainly my experience has been that it doesn't matter sort of where you start. You can start small. You can, get out on social media and start, sharing what you know and love with other people, and it'll have an impact, and one opportunity leads to another. And so I think it's important not to be, intimidated, not to feel like, some small local effort going and giving a talk to a local school, for example, might not feel like you're reaching a lot of people, but that can lead to an opportunity to go and speak to another group and another group. And, you meet people and you start to be recognized as somebody who, enjoys doing these things and is good at it. And it's good experience for you to kind of practice your craft. So I think just to go for it, start small, and one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you can be doing all kinds of really interesting and important work.
Let me mention, if some of you are available to look online, I think on the 10th, April the 10th, there's a panel discussion. It's put on by Student Pugwash, and so if you go to the web and look up Student Pugwash, there's a panel speaking directly to these issues about how you can think about early careers in policy, and Adriana is on that panel. I just happened to notice, it was coincident. I would totally agree with what Scott just said. Even if you're talking with one person, but a classroom with 7 or larger numbers, one person in that room could possibly make all the difference. So these are not really statistical average kind of impacts. So it's wise to take every interaction of that kind as an opportunity to change the world, essentially. And what I often advise students when they ask me in their various stages of their career, I point out that you're going to, even if you're not thinking you're going to move into policy right now, it could happen down the road. I had no decision tree, and Paul had no idea, as I think my comments earlier suggested, that I would end up in policy. It was the last thing in my mind. And that's true of most of us, my vintage, people I know who were presidential science advisors or agency directors or other people in the policy world even. That was not how they got started. Opportunities are created for them to do something new by someone. You often won't even know who the someone is. Could be your classmate today, tomorrow. Could be your professor. Could be somebody you work for when you take a job. Could be somebody who works for you. You just don't know, because the way these things happen is somebody gets a cold call. We're trying to put together a panel on X. We're trying to put together an advisory committee. We've got an open position in this. And it's cold. I mean, what name comes to mind? Well, you want your name to come to mind. So to me, that means treating everybody with respect. What I really tell students is be nice. And by nice, it's all in quotes. It doesn't mean just be pleasant. It means dependable, be trustworthy, be someone who, when they say they're going to do something, they do it. When they say they're going to help you, they do. If they're going to give you something by 5 o'clock, they do that by 5 o'clock. People sort of remember individuals, because surprisingly, it's a small percentage of the people around us who are actually so dependable in that way. So if you make a connection, somebody will remember that. And maybe it's a committee you served on later, and they just observe you in action and how you go about handling yourself in groups. But it leaves impressions, so that when somebody gets a cold call, they say, well, so-and-so would be really good, I think. Then that name goes on a list, and you might end up with a new kind of opportunity. You don't have to accept it, but that's how you have the opportunity to do new things. And if you're curious, nosy, like I always was, like, I wonder why the NSF doesn't fund my science. So whatever it is in your mind might cause you to go ahead and take a chance, do something else. And that can lead to something else. So it's kind of one damn thing after another. But it could be lead to an extraordinarily rewarding career, and you might even end up in policy. It's not the worst thing that can happen. Don't you think? I mean, and now I have this new respect for mosquitoes, and so I want to see your next book, Mosquitoes Are Your Friend. How will it go? Fly off the shelves.
I'll buy it.
I'm not willing to defend mosquitoes. I just want to put that on the record. All the other bugs, not
Sorry,
the
well, you're
mosquitoes.
the cockroach person.
I'm the cockroach.
Cockroaches are your friend. Thank you.
Well, so I'll pick up on the last thing that you said, Neil, and that's, don't be afraid to take the circuitous path, the nonlinear approach you don't know what your end goal really is going to be. I think a lot of people, have it clearly mapped out, but that following that, amidst all these other opportunities that may come your way, and also if I'm talking to my younger self, don't feel like so pressured to stay the course. Like if you're going down a particular path in your career or education, and you feel, I already have so much time invested, that's ridiculous, because you could be missing a whole lot of opportunities that could benefit you and the world around you. And then and also, I fell victim to conforming to other people's realities, and you know that's fine because it took me down a lot of different disciplines where I ended up learning a lot. But you know, what do you want to do? How do you want to shape the world? How do you want to influence policy? So put yourself first, and especially for all the women and young girls that are in the STEM field or want to break into the STEM field of research or you know, working in the world and industry. I mean, just don't be afraid to speak up and insert yourself into conversations, into different organizations, into different classes. I mean, I was always one of the only female students in my early undergrad classes in the STEM classes, and that continued on throughout my entire career. The first half of my career, I was the only female, I was the only Asian, as a chemist, as a field chemist, and that had a lot of challenges. But you know, you push through because I just always wanted to do the best job, and that was even seen as a senior executive in the federal government. I mean, less than, I think, 34% of the senior executive service is female, and I think 3% is Asian. And so you have to have that grit and resilience, and you know, policymaking isn't easy, but you know, you push through and have that sense of you know, that final end game that you want. And so I would not get discouraged, you know, by making poor decisions, bad decisions. You learn from all of that. Don't get discouraged by getting turned down multiple times, and you have to learn to live with failure and learn from it. But I think that's for all the future policymakers out there. You may not know exactly where you're going to end up, or that you'll even be doing policy, but embrace the opportunities, embrace the experiences, and just follow your own pathway, and try not to get too influenced by comparing yourself to others around you. Follow your own course and interests.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. It was very informative. Thank you. So with that, we're going to break for lunch. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock with our keynote speaker, Dr. Marcia McNutt.